Welcome everybody to this Pathways Forum called Radical Transformations, What Are They and How to Achieve Them? Lessons from Socio-Ecological Transitions and Research. And so as usual in these forums, we'll have a first part where we have invited 3 speakers who have kindly accepted to participate in this forum, and then a second part to discuss their presentations and answer the different questions you may have. So the 3 speakers that we've got today all participated in our 2023 Autumn School and are Katarina Bieli from the Flemish Institute for Technological Research, Paul Kierkemann from the University Paris Cité, and Celia Zimmerman from the Utrecht University. And so their talks are going to be about how they use socio-ecological transition studies to create meaningful transformations for better futures. And so as you'll see during the talks, there are multiple ways of encouraging and participating in the sustainable and transformative process. And so different disciplines and different researchers can quite easily mobilize different frameworks or approaches while still participating in the transformative process. And they can also have different goals and aims on how to be transformative. And so the main goal of this forum today is to give you different examples of way research can be transformative, but also to get you, the audience, to think about how your research is transformative, but also how you could do it in maybe different ways. And to make sure that we begin this forum from the same starting point, let me just share with you some quick slides with you to show how we can categorize these different goals and objectives while doing transformative research. So let's just get those slides out. So you should now be able to see my screen. And we kind of determined the 2 main axes that I'll talk to you about now to talk about how we can have transformation as our goal from a research standpoint. And so on the first stream that we'd like to talk to you about is what we called a descriptive and analytical stream. And on the left side of the stream, so beginning with more a descriptive kind of pathway, we could have the goal as your research project to get a better understanding of socio-ecological systems and sustainability problems. If we go down that stream a little bit, you could also have a different goal, which would be developing new narratives, theories, and even scientific paradigms about sustainability problems, what new goals should we achieve, and what strategies or pathways we would need to meet them. If we get even down this stream even further and closer to the analytical side of this axis, we could also try and understand how transformation processes happen in society, whether it be the change of values, behaviors, institutions, practices, or even different technologies. And lastly, on the more kind of analytical side of this axis, we could also have the aim with transformative research projects to co-develop research and strengthen actors' agency and capacity to act while facing the sustainability problems and issues. And you can also kind of consider a different and second axis that describes kind of how research projects' goals can differ in the way that they are transformative, and that would be how they interact with a broader non-scientific audience. And so this stream kind of is different, with one end having the aim of the research project being to then inform public debate and policies, or it could be transformative in a different way by actively and more directly participating in that transformation in society. And so that was a bit of a quick introduction and the end of what I wanted to say for a starting point before we started the forum. But to get the thinking going for the discussion and before leaving the floor to the speakers, I would like to share with you an answer board that you will find the link to in the chat, and that will be the basis of the discussion part of this forum that will be done in some outbreak groups. And so if you have a look, you'll be able to go onto this link soon. And so during the talks, you would be able to compare what the speakers' work and their presentations to your own current research projects and to see which categories your research might fit into. But also, with the second question here, you could kind of say in which ways would you like to make your research transformative in different ways compared to what you are doing now. And to do that, all you have to do to use this board is that you can pick up a post-it from the different coloured post-it section and drag it to whichever column you would like to put your research topic in. And so you can double click it then to add your name. But of course, if you don't want to put your name in, we're not going to force you. And lastly, if you, and then, okay, the second question, sorry, is here on the second line. And this would be for how would you like to do your research projects differently? What type of transformation would you like to include more of? And what would be the difficulties that you would think you might come across if you were to do your research projects differently? And so what I wanted to say earlier was that, lastly, if you think there are any other ways of doing transformative research, or you don't agree with the presented categories, you can put a post-it in the others section of this answer board, and we'll be able to discuss it in the breakout rooms during the discussion part of this forum. So without no further ado, I'm going to leave the floor to our first speaker, which is Katarina Bieli.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, everyone. I'll try to share my presentation. So, is everyone able to see my presentation? Yeah? Okay, good. So, also have to change view here. Good. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to open up the series of presentations today. I will be talking about how I'm using an adapted version of socio-ecological transition theory to understand transformative processes better. And I have been using this in various contexts. The illustrations mostly that I will be using in the presentation today are based on a recent publication where I applied it to understand potential change within a scientific field, which is economics in this case. I also combined there the socio-ecological theory with the work of Thomas Kuhn, the structure of scientific revolution. However, for the presentation here, the example that I will be using is not change within an academic field because I think it's too narrow. So I'm using an alternative example, which is mobility, but I will still be using the concept itself. As I said, I'm using socio-ecological thinking or as a basis. This is where I started from. So this is the adaptive cycle and panarchy. I'll talk about that in a bit more. Another starting point was kind of when I started to think about transformations, I was working on the role of human behavior or individuals within the energy transition. So I was interested to understand the dynamics between individuals and groups. Good. And usually when I look at a problem, let's say the energy transition or mobility transition, I try to apply systems thinking. And Celia is going to talk more about systems thinking in the third presentation and leverage points. I will not go into detail there. But when I apply systems thinking, I usually try to understand a problem holistically. So for mobility change, I'm not only looking at the technology, let's say the car or the bike that I want to change to, but also I'm looking at users, so the people who are going to use the bikes, but also the infrastructure, the economic circumstances, maybe also political circumstances around it. When we apply systems thinking, we can also think about the stakeholders involved in to understand the respective problem. And on this slide, you can see on a kind of a plane how the individuals within a respective system are connected. And some of these individuals have certain characteristics in common. So with the color, very easily to see probably, is there some are yellow, some are blue, some are red. So then you can think, okay, there are individuals within a system, but also these individuals form groups. And overall, then they're part of a bigger societal system. So then having a plain illustration or understanding of the system might not suffice. And I have to think of it in different levels, in different scales. So then again, it comes into play. I wanted to think about how then individuals and groups and these dynamics come together in transition contexts. And then I took a step back and thought, okay, which concepts are out there that help me to understand transformations like in general? And this is then where I screened a lot of different concepts. And this is also a kind of a disclaimer slide, I want to say. There are many different concepts out there, and I invite everyone who's dealing with transformation studies to have a look at the diversity of these concepts and take the concept that is best suitable to help you understand the problem at hand and maybe also combine them. So I ended up using socio-ecological theory, but that might not be the same for your case. Um, as I said, I'm using socio-ecological theory that is for various reasons. One of the reasons is that I try to understand the change process on one scale, like say the individual, right? And the adaptive cycles or the figure eight that you can see there helps me to do that. So it describes the change process on one level. But as I said before, I'm interested in the interactions between different scales, so the individual and the society, and the panarchy illustration, which you can see on the right-hand side, the connection between different adaptive cycles just allows me to do that, right? It helps me to look at different scales, the dynamics between those different scales. I'll explain these concepts a little bit because you might have never seen them before. It might be very confusing, and I'm just scratching on the surface there, of course, because of time reasons. The adaptive cycle is on the left-hand side, this figure eight, which describes a change process as a sequence of events, let's say. So you start off in the R quadrant. You can see that on the left bottom corner there, where a system starts to get built up. You can say that the parts of the systems are getting more and more connected, and it's getting stronger, and the system grows, and it goes into the conservation phase, into the K quadrant, which is the upper right corner. And then it reaches a peak before that, and then it goes into kind of tips into the release phase, which is the omega phase, where the parts that were before connected are getting released again. And then in the next phase, they're getting reorganized, and this reorganization helps them to recreate a system. That means that the adaptive cycle not necessarily shows transformations. It can just, under parentheses, show an adaptation of what is already there. Whether an adaptation or a transformation is happening depends very much on the circumstances. But systems thinking comes into play again. If we want to understand a certain situation, we're not looking just at one adaptive cycle, but we have to understand how it's connecting to the other aspects around it, right? And the panarchy helps us to do that. So this is on the right-hand side. You can see two of these adaptive loops connected. This is actually an adapted version because usually you find three of these loops together, but I thought for now it's easier to look at two of those. So these are connected on different temporal spatial scales. So that means there are smaller and faster loops and bigger and slower loops. And they're connected with the revolt and remember link. That means that a smaller link can push a bigger system into the release phase through the revolt link. And on the other hand, a bigger system can stabilize and recreate a smaller system through the remember link. still very abstract. What does that mean? I'm trying to come up with an example. So let's say my car breaks down, and now I have the choice to either get again a car or I want to get a bike, right? And the revolt link gets here interaction. I think actually I want to get a bike because the car is super expensive and is also polluting and is inefficient, right? It's big vehicle driving around. And also I want to have a more active lifestyle. So then a bike comes in handy. But the current mainstream mobility system is which is car-based, is very much alive and kicking back through the Remember link, and it tells me, well, actually, you should know that biking is super dangerous, is not safe. Also, the car is more convenient because it's faster and it's cozy. Then also, you're already paying for the parking this year. So if you now switch to a bike, you're losing out money actually. And what if you have to carry something heavy around? Then you only have the bike. It's not helping. The new cars are also more environmental friendly and they're getting more and more efficient, right? And then finally, what if you have to bring your mother to the hospital and all you have is this car, is this bike, right? So you actually need the car. So you can see how the system, the overarching system, which we're part of, is kicking back through the Remember link and then kind of recreates the system that was there on my individual level. And in the end, I'm getting a new car. So a transformation here is not happening. I'm getting a car and not a bike. Let me go back to this cleaner version of it. So you can see in our original version there, the revolt link goes into the conservation phase where it's kind of the bigger system is already close to the release, right? So I can trigger a release of a bigger system. But what I just showed before with the car example is that a change didn't happen just because I wanted to have a bike. So then actually it might be more correct that the revolt link is happening much earlier, where the system, the overarching system I'm a part of, is very much resilient to my revolting. And then I thought, okay, actually these interactions between the smaller systems and bigger systems are not a one point in time interaction, maybe with me and the system, but there are many individuals, right? So are there dynamics that happening throughout the course of the logic of the adaptive cycles, and what does that mean and how does that look like? So that led me to the conclusion, okay, I have to adapt the illustration a little bit to understand the processes that are going on better. And I did that you can see this in this illustration there. Please don't get carried away by some of the labels there because they are applying to the case of the changes within a scientific field, right? What I want you to think of is the blue band there is, for example, the current car-based mobility system, and the pink band is an alternative system that might be more based on bikes and public transport. And you can see there that a change or transformation is happening because we're shifting from the blue band into the pinkish band, so towards the bike. It could also be that a change on the societal level is not happening, then we would stay in the blue band. I tried to carry on the logic of the adaptive cycle into this illustration, right? So you remember the different letters, and the letters are also illustrated in this illustration there. So we have the K phase, the omega phase, the alpha, and the R. And you see that in the omega phase, so in the release phase, the system is shifting over from the blue to the new system, the bike-based system in the pink band there. Also, we still have the embeddedness or the nested aspect of the panarchy there, right? Where various different scales interconnect with each other. You have the dot like elements, which are the individuals. So this is the micro scale. And then they form groups. Maybe a lot of people don't want to have a car anymore. They form groups together and lobby for more biking. This is the meso level, and then we have the macro level, which is the blue band itself or the pink band itself, and we have the interactions represented by the many errors also there in the illustration, the small blue and pinkish one. Another thing that I want to bring into context here is that what I said before, it depends whether a transformation or change is happening, depends very much on which part or which point in time these interactions are happening, right? And this is connecting to the context, to the concept of resilience. Resilience is very much core to the adaptive cycle. And there it is the combinatory effect of potential and connected connectedness. You can see that as the two axes on the sides of the illustration. What does that mean? It means, as I said before, the adaptive cycle itself is kind of the combination of smaller parts that are combined. But in the beginning, they're not. They're loosely connected or not connected at all. And that means when now a shock hits, they easily can move around and can readapt. And so the system is very resilient in this initial stage. But as the system matures and grows, these connections between these dots become more. So the system is getting more and more connected, and also the potential is getting locked in, which means that if now a shock hits, the system is not as able to react and adapt, and that means that it can go into the release phase. Now, whether a transformation happens or not depends again. So if a transformation happens, then we might think of tipping points, and Paul is going to talk about that a little bit more. So that means that the system then tips from one dynamic equilibrium into another one, or it recreates, as I said before, and we buy another car. But this not just shows resilience on one level, right? One adaptive cycle. Again, we have to think of the panarchy. So there are various of these adaptive cycles working together, and there's cross interactions between those. So how can we understand that? And there's a concept that I personally like a lot by Walker and others, where resilience is a combinatory effect of four different variables. So we have the interactions between the different scales, right? So remember and revolt, which is the Water and others call this the panarchy variable. This is the dotted blue line-ish curve rather here. And then we have the variables of the valley itself. So that's latitude and resistance. Think of you want to climb a mountain and you're in the valley. The higher it is, the harder it is to get to the mountain. The broader it is, the longer it takes you also to get out of the valley and up there. So that describes kind of how difficult it is to push the system out of this valley. And finally, we have precariousness, which means like how close is the system already to getting to the tipping point there. Think of how close are you already to get to the peak of the mountain, right? So this is what it tries to illustrate there. I took these four variables that describe resilience and also put them into the illustration that I developed. And you can see that there, try to explain is that the individuals and then also the group of individuals, they're not at the center of the band, but they're at the side of it, they're at the fringe of it. The idea is there that if we're not agreeing with what is happening in society, that we might form at the fringe of it, kind of outside of it, parallel systems in a way. So we might form a bikers club or something like that, which is more happening on the side. And the idea then is that the more people are getting to the side and also organizing there on the side, the more the gravitational point of the system itself gets to the side, and the easier it is to tip into another system. So kind of then in the going into the pink band over there that is created. Then we have the latitude and resistance. This is not perfectly illustrated in this one. I have a 3D illustration of that as well, because you have to imagine that the band is actually not a band, but a valley, right? So, and I tried to illustrate it a little bit with the darker part of the band, illustrating something deeper. Think of a map, right, where you have the different layers there. And also the breadth of the band itself varies. So if you're getting closer to the omega phase, so the release phase, resilience is getting lower, which would mean that the band gets smaller, so not as narrow, and is shallow, not as deep anymore. And finally, also the Bannerkey link. There is, of course, the interaction, so the friction that is created by the individuals forming a niche, a subgroup, and revolting against the mainstream system, and the mainstream system fighting back through the remember link. So you have that there as well. Good. So this is what I came up with for me to help me understand the dynamics along the time better of these nested systems. And now you can see, okay, so what, right? It's a nice illustration, it's colorful, but what are you doing with this? And as I said before, for me, these different theoretical concepts are lenses that we use to better understand the situation and the problems at hand is a learning tool in the end, right? Where we can think about an issue differently. So my lessons learned are that we are dealing with very complex systems. Think of all of the adaptive cycles. They have different phases. There are interactions between them. And this complexity basically means that we cannot plan or predict a change. We also learned from the adaptive cycle that a transformation includes a release phase. It includes some sort of crisis, which also means that a transformation likely is not something very comfortable. Timing is key. We may want a transformation to happen right now. Maybe I'm not happy that we are driving around with cars so much, but if the system is very resilient to change right now, the change is not happening right now. So we have to take into consideration where we are right now and that the change is not happening if the time is not ripe. Barriers, if we want to have the change, I think that was for me a key learning outcome is we have to understand where is the current system hindering change. So where is the remember link working, as I've illustrated before with the car example, right? Where are we having these reasons why we're not shifting? On the other hand, the tipping point, so the revolt link is very important. I think the revolt link can provide strategies of how we can push the current system faster over towards the release phase with continuous efforts. It's not a one point in time action, but a continuous effort pushing the current system or closer to the release phase. That means also that the seeds of change are important. As said, we cannot plan or predict the change, but we can prepare for it. And we have to prepare for it because when there is a release, when the current system is falling apart, the alternative needs to be ready. That also means that institutionalization is important. So the alternatives to a certain degree need to organize in order to be strong enough to survive the collapse of the system that is around us. So if the mobility system is crashing in a sense, we need to be strong enough to have some alternative ready. Information education is also key, I would say. So on the one hand, we need to, as I said, uncover and show people, hey, these are the remember links. These are maladaptations. They're only superficial solutions to the problem. They're not really solving the problem. And on the other hand, we need to come up and inform about the solutions that are working and providing a better solution to the problems that we have. Good. I hope this was not too confusing and was insightful to a certain degree. I'm happy to answer some short questions right now, and otherwise you can also reach me via email. Good. And stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. So yeah, we've got a quick amount of time for one or two short clarifying questions if you want some clarification on a specific part of her presentation. If not, we can go next to the next presentation. Okay, I'll take that as her presentation was very clear. Okay, Paul, you're up.
Okay, great. I'll try to share mine. So, um, always a bit tricky. Let's start at the beginning. That'll probably be more useful.
I think you just need to double click so that we can see it, maybe.
Yeah, I think it needs time to load. Also, because my laptop's a bit old, but it should come up in a second. Yeah,
I can see it now.
that's good. Can you all see it now? All right, so very happy to be here. So I'm Paul. I'm a third year PhD student in social geography at the Université Paris-Cité. And I'm very happy to discuss transformative research today because it's been really a personal question of mine, coming from a background where I was trained in action research and having started my PhD in a more disciplinary oriented laboratory. It's always a bit of a challenge for me to try and bring or bridge these two worlds together. And so what I'll be presenting today uh, is mostly my reflection as of today on how I can try to carry out transformative research from a rather disciplinary perspective, or at least interdisciplinary perspective. Just so you know, before I start, so I work also on lifestyles transformations, and more specifically on low carbon lifestyles in France. At least you know where I stand. Uh, so obviously, you probably all know that well, the world is facing a strong environmental crisis, which means that all societies, including post-industrial societies, will have to undergo drastic transformations to live up to those challenges. And so far, there have been mostly two types of research or solution-oriented research looking at how to tackle or address those challenges. On the one hand, research favoring interventions around infrastructure and research focusing more on the behavioral side. That's mostly where what I read and what I look into, and which I will focus on today. So within this general behavior-based agenda, there are different types of research. On the one hand, there are what I call integrative, but mostly transdisciplinary agendas, proposing to look to advance new concepts, new methods, and new stakeholders into the research arena. And those can be either framed within sustainability science or other approaches such as multi-level perspective, and other transdisciplinary undertakings such as solution-oriented research, often underpinned by normative aim to find or come up with a social solution to the socio-ecological crises. So positive understanding of social tipping points, which I will dwell on a bit later, I classify in that stream. On the other hand, there are also more traditional disciplinary agendas looking at environmental crises. For instance, from or within sociology, there's a growing body of literature around socialization practice theory that study, for instance, green distinctions between high cultural capital or high economic capital individuals, and from other disciplines such as social psychology. There's also growing literature, for instance, looking at peer pressure or human cooperation in developing new norms or attitudes towards the environment. So what I will look now, and one of the first attempts for me to join transformative research was to think about how I could muster up or how I could tap into the first body of literature around, that is mostly transdisciplinary. And that's why I gave a specific emphasis to the notion of social tipping points, which is very much linked to the evolution of lifestyles, because, lifestyles are generally not guided, they're mostly spontaneous, even if they're obviously informed by material and political institutions. there is no law per se or directly targeting them, and so they tend to evolve in a rather spontaneous way. And that's why I thought that social tipping points could be an interesting framework to look at them and try to see whether they evolve fast enough for us to engage in sustainable futures. But we have to recap on what social tipping points are. They can be defined as points or thresholds at which quantitative changes in a given system trigger a nonlinear change process that is driven by system internal feedback loops or mechanisms that will inevitably lead to an altered or new state of the system that will be irreversible. So that sort of links to what Katharina was saying before, um, past that revolt uh, generalization, let's say. And there have been empirical studies in social sciences trying to tap into that notion. For instance, literature looking at the widespread evolution of opinion changes on same-sex marriage, for instance, that have really demonstrated a radical shift that was feeding or that was fed by multiple feedback loops, and that ultimately led to a fundamental different equilibrium in society. So this way of using social points in social sciences is not new. Actually, social tipping points is a notion that firstly originated in the social sciences, in urban studies, more specifically in studies looking at residential segregation, but it was quickly appropriated by natural sciences and has mostly been used in those disciplines. You're probably all familiar with climate tipping points and the idea of planned boundaries that all think about natural tipping points. And it's only more recently that social tipping points were in the limelight again within the social sciences. So there's a small graph that I added by Milko Rate that was published last year that shows a bit that going back and forth between social sciences and natural sciences and the journey of tipping points as a notion. More generally, social tipping points are connected to a wider interdisciplinary literature on social change, which also includes the social diffusion of innovations and its famous S curves, social contagions, socio-ecological transitions or regime shifts, and critical transitions. So that led me to a question when trying to apply that framework to my research topic, being reading as follow. Are social tipping points relevant for analyzing the current lifestyle evolutions in France? And second question, if not, in what sense could I make transformative research? In what sense could other behavior-centered methods help practitioners foster social transformations with ecological purposes? So before getting into answering those questions, just a quick stop to define lifestyles specifically, as it's a complex object. What I even classify as a hyphenating concept, and what I mean by that is that it brings together a bundle of different practices that are generally studied differently by the social sciences. What is also interesting in the concept of lifestyles is that each of the practices or behaviors included in the lifestyle influences other practices. So it's a very holistic object in the end. For instance, we can think of driving that will inevitably have consequences on, for instance, food shopping, because you won't stop at the same types of shops if you drive, for instance, at least compared to if you walked, for instance. And that will eventually impact a lot on the type of food that you'll be consuming. There's really this idea of interrelatedness and one realm shaping the other. So that's why I think that this concept also resonates a lot with the general interdisciplinary literature in sustainability science. And I thought that'd be interesting to point out. What I'm particularly paying attention to is our climate-friendly lifestyles, which I define as bundles of practices underpinned by attitudes that will enable significant reductions in an individual's carbon footprint across the different areas that make up daily life, such as food, consumption goods, accommodation, travel. So to pick up where I left off with both research questions being, are social tipping points a relevant framework to think about climate-friendly lifestyles in France? To test that hypothesis, I mostly use quantitative data, three survey data, two at national scale, and one, oh, sorry, there has been a glitch, one at local scale in Grenoble, in the Alps, French Alps. And so if we first give a first assessment of climate-friendly lifestyles through the lens of social tipping points in France, at least as of today, we have to look whether they can satisfy or fulfill criteria for effectively using social tipping points. And those criteria are given in an insightful article by Milka Rate from last year, where she warns against the dangers of overusing social tipping points. So she says that to really establish that there is a social tipping points being crossed, there needs to be evidence of alternative stable states. There needs also to be evidence of non-linearities. That means that beyond the tipping point, the trend has to change dramatically and accelerate sharply. There also needs to be positive feedback loops, as in the definition, means that those feedback dynamics will amplify and make for the acceleration. And there also needs to be limited reversibility, meaning that once the dynamic is started, you can't really stop it, at least not in the short run. And so I tried to plot the share of respondents reporting climate-friendly lifestyle in one of my surveys across 5 years to get an idea of what the trend was and if we could say that a given social tipping point had been crossed. And if the first criterion can be said to be fulfilled, because as you can see on the graph on the right, there has been a steady increase since 2018 with a number of respondents reporting on climate-friendly lifestyle that is at least 3 times higher than that 5 years before. All the last 3 criteria for asserting that there are social tipping points have not been evidenced in that case, because the trend is still pretty much linear. There's no explosion so far in the trend, hinting also that potentially positive feedbacks could be limited, and above all, there seems to be, well, the process still seems to be reversible, because in between 2021 and 2022, the share really plateaued which is definitely not what would be seen in a social if a social tipping point had been crossed. So that meant for me that it was improper to reflect on those climate-friendly lifestyles in the tipping points terms, and so I had to think again how to make that research transformative. So possibly using that type of conceptualization was not efficient, but there are many other ways, and I'd like to suggest another path for making transformative research. That would be to um, highlight to note that even if there is no nonlinear upward trends in the diffusion of those climate-friendly lifestyles, there is still a growing trend, and there are possibly crucial social factions that would need to be identified and encouraged in changing their lifestyles. And so the first part of my work has been to identify those crucial social factions, and those includes particularly two fractions of upper classes, high income earners who report awareness above average, but also have the highest GHG emissions across society. And a second fraction are highly educated individuals who both report awareness but also contained carbon footprints. There's also, and that's where social geography comes into play, room for identifying specific places, what I call fertile grounds, for the dissemination of those climate-friendly attitudes and practices, and having a more spatial look at the distribution of lifestyles is quite telling, because once you start doing that, you realize that there is really high diversity in the trends of changing lifestyles across territories, and local or environmental socialization. So it means by that I refer to people trying to push friends or relatives to adopt more sustainable practices. Is much more developed in city cores and city centers than in suburban areas or even exurbs, even within a given urban area, as you can see from the graph. And so once those key audiences or those key actors in society had been identified, I then proposed to work with local governments that host quite a number of those high-stake profiles to discuss and design together targeted social and spatial interventions. And so two examples that I'm setting up right now is on the one hand, a collaboration with Grenoble-Alpes Métropole, so a local authority around the metropolitan area of Grenoble, and around helping them getting precise qualitative feedback from local inhabitants on policies they conducted, and another collaboration with the Council of Paris, so the equivalent to the Paris City Hall, for whom I will write a public policy guide on the relationship of the different privileged groups to socio-ecological transition, which will help them really make that specific high-stake group a category of municipal public action, as of today, public or municipal public action was mostly targeted to lower working classes, which have a much less significant carbon impact. And so those are both those are two examples in which I believe that research can be transformative while still tapping into traditional bodies of literature, but fostering new public policies categories that can help make a change in the end. Also, I hope. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Paul. So if anybody has a clarifying question, feel free to ask it, whether it be by the chat or using your own voice. Okay, I'll take that again as a very clear presentation. So I think we'll be able to go to the last speaker of the day, last but not least, so Celia. I'll be sharing her slides, so I'll be sharing them, but I've got no merit in them whatsoever. So off you go, you can and tell me when to change the slides each time.
Okay, great. I hope you can all hear me. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Katharina and Paul, already for two nice presentations. And I want to give you more now a bit more of a practical example of how perhaps some transformation theories are applied in the field. So my name is Silja Zimmermann, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Copernicus Institute for Sustainable Development and the Center for Complex System Studies at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And let's start. Next slide, please. So, like almost everywhere in the world, Arctic indigenous communities as well see themselves confronted with numerous challenges that are threatening their livelihoods. And these challenges are often very complex. And with complex, I mean that they span vast spatial and also temporal scales, and different factors and variables are interacting with each other, affecting these challenges. And since Arctic indigenous communities' livelihoods have very intricate social ecological connections, many of these challenges manifest in their food systems and ultimately threaten their food security and food sovereignty. So the question that I'm asking in my PhD research is, how can we achieve sustainability transformations in Arctic indigenous communities' food systems? And basically, with my project, I want to show how approaches from the complex system sciences can be used in transdisciplinary research settings to then enable effective system transformations in the particular context of Arctic indigenous food systems. Next slide, please. So the specific context of my case study is the St. Paul Island food system. St. Paul Island is one of the 5 Pribilof Islands in the Bering Sea, and it's the permanent home to around 380 people, so really small community. And of these 330 people, most belong to the indigenous group of Aleut peoples, or Unangach as they call themselves. And their local food system is a mixed local food system, which means that the community both subsistence harvests, mostly Steller sea lion, northern fur seals, local reindeer, but also birds, halibut, crab. And they also get their food from a small local community store and order food online through Amazon, for example. Next slide, please. And in this case study, we designed several work packages to co-produce the system, target, and transformation knowledge that we think is needed to support an effective transformation in the St. Paul Island food system. System knowledge thereby builds an understanding of how the system currently functions, what the system's different components are, what the dynamics between them are, how they interact, and so on. So that's really system knowledge on the social ecological food system. Then target knowledge refers to an understanding of a system's desirable future. And transformation knowledge is knowledge of how to reach that desirable future through, for example, interventions, transformation pathways, and leverage points. Next slide, please. So to fully co-create this research process between us, so researchers from Utrecht University and the Aleut community of St. Paul Island and their tribal government, we started by having several meetings with representatives of both the Aleut community and their tribal government. I think here in the figure called AXPI and TGSPI as abbreviations. And together with them, we co-created the research objectives and the methodological approach. And we then promoted the project within the community through, for example, the local radio station, through flyers, through Facebook groups. There's this one Facebook group that has, I think, 370 members, so basically everyone from the community. And we also hired a local research assistant to assist with the data collection and also with the initial interpretation of the results. Then for the data collection, we used very diverse methods to really create opportunities for as many community members as possible to share their knowledge and contribute to the research project in various ways. So for example, we used different interview techniques, we conducted workshops, we did focus groups, storytelling sessions, but also crafting and painting sessions, so like post-normal methodologies. And then we, of course, transcribed and analyzed all the data that we had collected, validated our results with community and government representatives, and finally communicated the system knowledge that we had acquired through these activities. Next slide, please. And yeah, so when we designed the activities, that were part of this research project, we of course really wanted to make sure that we got a holistic system understanding from them. So we designed our activities with the leverage points framework in mind. For those of you who don't know the leverage points framework, it was initially introduced by Donella Meadows in 1999, who came up with a list of 12 places in a system where interventions can initiate system-wide transformative change. And David Epson then matched these leverage points with 4 system characteristics, which are here in the figure called parameters, feedbacks, design, and intent. And the general idea is that the deeper we go in this triangle, which represents the system, the more leverage we have for transforming the system. But also, like Katharina, for example, already said, that these levels are nested and constraining, which means that characteristics on one level can block change on another, and so on. And yeah, that's why our research aimed at understanding the St. Paul Island food system really across all these 4 levels of systemic depth, including their cross-level interconnections and how they might block or enable change. Next slide, please. So yeah, I don't want to go too much into detail here, but some of the activities that we did to acquire this quote-unquote holistic system understanding or system knowledge about the St. Paul Island food system were, for example, workshops, like I said, and interviews to understand, for example, local food security challenges, how are they interconnected, what makes them complex, also to understand food-related interactions between different actors in the food system. So, for example, between subsistence providers and people in the community who don't subsist themselves, who don't go hunting or fishing or gathering. And also, we wanted to understand what are these individuals' agencies over food security issues. So what can they do to address them, and what they maybe don't have agency over. And we also hosted, for example, storytelling sessions with different community groups to understand the values that people hold in the food system. So this would relate to the very deep intent level of the food system, the basis of the triangle, so to say, which you saw on the previous slide. Next slide, please. The one before, yeah. And I also participated, for example, in different activities around food, like halibut fishing, reindeer hunting, berry picking. And during these activities, I learned a lot about local subsistence practices, of course, but also about the cultural meaning and relevance behind those practices, which would also relate to this very deep intent level of the system, from which the food system then arises and which informs the other levels of the food system. Next slide, please. Yes. So then, based on this system understanding that we acquired, our next aim was to develop target knowledge. So, like I said, an understanding of how a desirable future state of the food system would look like. And therefore, we hosted a participatory scenario development workshop with local community members to together develop a shared community vision of what the St. Paul Island food system should be like in the future. And there again, we used a bunch of different activities throughout the workshop, but by the end of the 2 days, we had developed one shared community vision for the local food system. Next slide, please. And we then commissioned a local artist, Ethan Candyfire. You could actually see him in the photo on the previous slide, who was also present at the workshop and co-created this vision with us and all the participants. We commissioned him to paint this vision for us, and you can see his interpretation of the community vision here on the slide. So, for example, I mean, he could explain this much better to you, but what we, for example, see is those DNA strands in the background behind this young couple. Those, for example, represent the DNA strands of their ancestors, which used to live on the Aleutian Chain Islands, and how those, this basically represents how this ancestral DNA is still intertwined with the present and future food system. We also, for example, see a lot of different local subsistence foods, which are important for the community and which they hope to still be part of the food system in the future as well. So a very local and nature-based food system. Next slide, please. Then finally, from the system knowledge and target knowledge that we had developed by this point, our final goal was to develop transformation knowledge. So knowledge of how to reach that desirable future state through, for example, interventions, transformation pathways, and leverage points. Therefore, we hosted another workshop, a pathways workshop, which we called it, with, again, local government representatives and community representatives to develop specific transformation pathways towards the shared community vision of the St. Paul Island future food system that you've seen in the painting on the previous slide. And our aim there was really to think strategically about the steps that need to be taken to make the co-created future vision become a reality. Of course, we realized that the community does not have agency over all the issues that need to be addressed and doesn't have the agency to resolve all these underlying challenges that contribute to low food security and low food sovereignty levels to date. But the workshop was really designed to understand, okay, but what does the community have agency over? What are maybe local interventions that can be taken to improve the food security, to come a bit closer to that desirable future? Next slide, please. And we, for example, used the 3 Horizons framework to discuss why it is difficult to address current challenges in the food system. We used it to discuss how can we perhaps overcome these challenges, and also which initiatives could we implement locally to reach that desired future as much as we can. And eventually we came up with 5 realistic pathways focused on, as you can see here in this image, local capacity building, economic diversification, local agency building, subsistence lifestyle, and community cohesion and health. And along all these pathways, or along each of these pathways, the community and the government can take specific interventions or actions locally to transform the local food system and get closer to this desirable future state. Next slide, please. So to give you a bit more of a practical idea of what those interventions are, I brought this table. So here you again see the 5 pathways, the problem areas each of these pathways aims to address, then the specific interventions with which these problem areas will be addressed, and their anticipated impacts on the food system. And next slide, please. For example, if we look at the subsistence lifestyle pathway, one main problem in the St. Paul Island food system is the limited participation of community members in subsistence activities and the consequent loss of the traditional subsistence lifestyle. And one intervention that the community could implement to address this issue is to inventory subsistence knowledge resources, which would increase community members' access to the knowledge needed to then get involved in subsistence activities. Or another idea to address this issue was to create a farmers market locally to buy, sell, share, and exchange subsistence foods to increase access to these foods for community members who don't hunt or fish themselves. Or, for example, a third idea was to provide classes on the skills that are needed to be on the land, such as wilderness, first aid, and water safety, so that community members can overcome the fear of getting involved in subsistence activities, which is also a big problem. And also there, if you're a little bit familiar with the leverage point framework, you can already see that we really try to co-create interventions across all these system levels. And this is, of course, only a very small fraction of the problem areas, but also of the interventions that were identified in this Pathways workshop. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is actually my final slide, I think, because I just wanted to share that there is actually one food system intervention that was developed and that was already implemented, and that is the Tipping the Iceberg podcast. The project is called Tipping the Iceberg. So the podcast has the same name. And this podcast was developed as a community-based tool to communicate this system, target, and transformation knowledge that we co-created throughout the research project to the community, but also to a wider audience if other researchers or interested people are interested in it. So based on all the research that we've done, we designed this podcast to share our research results, but also to address current community concerns through both scientific insights and local stories from community members, but also then showcase potential solutions to these challenges. So showcase some of the initiatives that maybe already are on a small scale or could be in the future implemented locally to reach a better future. And by doing this, we try to establish a more hopeful narrative about the future of the local food system, because many people in the community currently hold a very negative narrative about their future, and we identified this as an important leverage point of how a more positive and hopeful narrative could lead to more action. And to actually assess this transformative potential of the podcast to contribute to transformative change, we also designed 2 online surveys, which the community filled out before and after listening to the podcast. And in fact, we see from the survey results that after listening to the podcasts, the community felt more informed about what local challenges are and how they are interconnected, but also about the solutions. And they felt empowered to continue working towards increased food security for their community. Yeah, next slide, please. But that's just to say thank you all very much for listening. And yeah, I'm happy to answer clarifying questions if you have any. Thanks.
Yep, I think we've got one question. So actually we've got two, so we can start maybe with Paz Constantini and then go for the question that's in the chat afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you, Celia. It was very inspiring. I was wondering about if you based the mix of the three horizon framework with the leverage points. Did you base on some like methodology that it's already out there, or did you design a methodology especially for that? And if that's the case, can we access it, or like can we see it?
So the original idea for the methodology was based on, thank you for your question, first of all. The original idea for the methodology was based on a paper from Marianne Falado, who was a PhD candidate of Eleanor Bennett at McGill University. I can send a link to that paper in the chat in a minute. But I took that approach and developed it a bit further. So for example, I also then added focus groups to elicit community values to that approach. And so, yeah, that paper is currently in revision. So hopefully I can share it soon. But yeah, also the Falado paper, and then later, hopefully my own paper gives a very detailed rundown of what the different steps are. Yeah, because I always found that most helpful in my own journey to just see, okay, what is step 1, 2, 3, and what do I actually need to do to carry something like this out? Yeah.
Great, thank you. I would love to see it.
Okay, I think we've got one last question in the chat, and then I'll explain to you all how the breakout sessions are going to work. So the question is from Nicholas, which was, what guided your classification of the interventions into specific leverage points? And it's for Celia as well.
Well, the leverage points framework. I don't know, probably I don't understand your question correctly. But we, so in the Pathways workshop, we sat down with the participants and together, yeah, came up with this huge table of different interventions that could be implemented locally. And then afterwards, with the system knowledge that we had in mind, we, using the leverage points framework, organized them across these 4 levels of systemic depth. And that is where would these actions or interventions intervene, where in the system would they intervene, but what are the, also where, on which system level would be the anticipated outcomes. And that is, of course, anticipated, because like Katharina also said, those are complex systems, we cannot predict them. So in reality, that might, when you actually intervene, it might have very different outcomes. But based on the system knowledge that we gathered, we could, of course, take a relatively informed categorization. And yeah, so I hope I understood that correctly. Thanks.
Okay, great. So if there are any other questions, I think we can do it in the breakout sessions. So as I said during the introduction, so the basis of this second part of the forum, which is the discussion part, is to use the answer boards that we shared at the beginning and during the forum to kind of, create discussion on what you put down on the board and the questions that the board kind of raised for you. So the idea is that we'll split you now into 2 breakout sessions to discuss 2 main different questions. And that would be for like roughly 40 minutes. So firstly, the first question would be, do you have any questions or comments concerning the categories on the board? Or do you have general approach questions about the approaches used by our 3 speakers? And then secondly, the next question would be, how could you make your research topics transformative in different ways? And the main question we wanted to ask you here to the speakers and also to the audience would be, what obstacles would you need to address, or what advice would you need to be able to make your research topics and projects transformative in different ways? So I think we can now put people into the breakout session groups. I don't know for the other group, but that just a quite funny cut. But I hope that everybody managed to discuss in their group and have a few ideas exchanged. So here, to kind of close up this Pathways Forum, the idea was that one of the speakers in each or other group could maybe summarize what was discussed in a sentence or two. I don't know if I can see Paul with his camera on. I focus straight onto him because he was in my group. So maybe you could start, Paul.
Yeah, sure. So let me just try to bring to collect my thoughts on it. So we'll discuss different we've discussed a lot around co-creation and the status it should have in research agendas, and the fact that possibly it's not always as valued as other types of research by institutions, which can be an obstacle. At the same time, it's very relevant in many instances, even though maybe some topics or settings are more easily suitable, conducive to co-creation processes in general. Also knowing that it takes time and skills to engage people from multiple backgrounds and settings and different types of institutions. There was also we've also discussed about the fact that it's that there's a question of whether how we can conceptualize together with a very wide range of different stakeholders, knowing that some won't have a scientific backgrounds, and there's the idea of both really making a point of bringing clear concepts to the table that everyone understands, at the same time having concepts that are malleable enough to incorporate feedback from other stakeholders. And I think that last maybe point was around the different types of knowledge and whether every stakeholder at the table held the same type held the same type of knowledge, and maybe what we were edging towards before we were quite harshly interrupted was the fact that perhaps not all research questions are as suitable for co-creation and just for and from getting new perspective, new new light from non-traditional, non-scientific stakeholders. Hope that kind of summarizes all, but feel free to add anything that I missed.
And I think it was all roughly there from what I from the discussion. Maybe Celia or Katharina, would you like to summarize what was in the other room, the breakout?
Should I go ahead or?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we also talked about co-creation, interestingly, but I think from a different perspective. So we were talking about the structural barriers to co-creation, but also the barriers that maybe come from the stakeholder side. So on the structural side, we were thinking, okay, is difficult to involve stakeholders because of the logic of project writing, and that you need to kind of have everything mapped out before you start, which kind of is not conducive to this kind of more co-creative processes where you want things to emerge and want things to be more open. Also, then we talked a little bit, okay, can we not also be more to the service of people? So we're there, and if people need something, we can address the problems that they're facing. But then kind of the issue is, okay, we need to be paid as well. Then we need to apply for funding. So then until we can really work with people, years might have passed, right? Until we have gotten the funding. And that also relates to the logic of projects. We often work with communities or with people together or in a certain place for max, let's say 3 years, 4 years if we're lucky. That's not a very long time. So we stay at a place, we, let's say, extract knowledge and then we leave. And what's in then for the stakeholders? That was the other question that we also thought about, kind of the exchange. So what are stakeholders getting? And ideally in a co-creative process, it's there's also something in it in terms of knowledge gain for the stakeholders themselves, but that might not always be the case. So that we also need to be careful. I hope I summarized that somewhat well. If not, then please add.
No, it's quite interesting that both discussions went towards co-creation. But so yeah, I think we've still got a few minutes left if people are slightly frustrated that they didn't get to finish what they had to say. I know, I think Bruno got cut off while he was finishing what I was saying in our group. But we've got a few minutes if anybody wanted to add anything more on this subject.
Maybe I can add one point, because we talked about how our research can be transformative, but there is another question, which is how, as a researcher, I can be transformative. And of course, it's very connected, but just wanted to highlight that in the last years, and some of you can probably elaborate on that, but as researchers, more and more researchers have been involved politically with a political engagement. So it's another way, I think, for researchers, maybe not research projects, but researchers to be transformative. And yeah, I think it's also something we need to discuss and share experience, because it can be a bit tricky, probably as well. So just wanted to highlight this aspect also. Any experience you want to share about that? I see Bruno who feels very
because we had a little bit of this discussion last week in the autumn school, and it was interesting to see the many different ways of for a scientist to have an influence on pathways. So yeah, of course, there is the research and the impact that the research can have, but there is also the engagement in activism, political activities, unions and associations. So there are many, many different ways. And in between, so there are kind of two extremes, the classical research that will be published and will maybe one day have an impact on something in the real life. And on the other side, the direct engagement, activism, and so on. But in between, there are many ways of having an impact, like doing transdisciplinary research, engaging in policy science dialogues, working at the international level, like around negotiations or around international scientific bodies like IPCC or IPBES. So there are many different ways. But of course, we cannot do everything because we have a limited time. So sometimes we have to make decisions on where we are more skilled and we may have more impact. So I think it's also a process of reflecting on this diversity let's say, impact pathways, yeah. And so among the different options, we have to reflect on where we feel more confident, more skilled, and where we can have more impact. So, yeah.
Thanks, Bruno.
I would also like to add, if ever people were in a conversation, like in a breakout room, but they had questions for the speakers that were in the other room, do feel free to ask, because we have got still a bit of time left. But of course, don't feel forced to. And I can close up this session.
Maybe, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. You're going to say something.
Maybe something to add in terms of kind of how transformative our research is in the kind of the what Bruno said, the sphere of influence. No, like I think science and society cannot really be distinguished often. No, for economics is a very good example there, and it kind of connects to the paper that I've written. Is that what we taught in economic school reflects what's happening out there in real world, and we see that in real world, and what people think of economics and what they want is changing, and we see that also in the economics field. Then I think kind of one part of activism, in a sense, is that we are changing our own fields. No, that we are saying, okay, the theories that we are operating with are how we see the world, these mainstream paradigms, we need to also to change them in the end. And of course, that I think there is this mutual interaction between how our science changes, how then we change the dialogue with policymakers, how it changes the real world out there with society, because of course people are getting educated and so on and so forth. So I think this should not be overlooked, the change the impact that we have within our own craft, let's say. Yeah.
Colleen, did you want to go?
Yeah, I was going to say maybe then I can add on. I wanted to connect a comment that someone made in our breakout room with Celia's research. So Barbara was saying that something that we need to be careful with, or something that often comes up in transformative research and in co-construction processes, is that we have limited time. So in a sense, also limited impact in a sense, and that we need to be, I mean, maybe correct me if I understood wrongly what you just said, if I didn't understand it correctly, but that's what I got out of it, at least. So that if you have limited time and a limited project time, in a sense, you're never going to be able to go fully into the transformation, because building trust and everything makes sense. So because, Celia, you're working with a community that's, let's say, far away from where you live, and it's not necessarily the community that you engage with in your daily life, how do you sort of try to, well, how do you deal with this basically? And how do you make sure maybe that the transformations that you're trying to kickstart with your project have a lasting impact?
Yeah, very, very good point. I actually writing about this right now, and as I'm writing up the synthesis for my PhD, because I have the feeling that this is really what came short in the project. Kind of, we generated all the knowledge that we need to now be able to act, and then the project ends, and it didn't include any binding commitments to actually take action. And I think that is really frustrating. And that's probably a problem in many projects. So yeah, it would be great if in the future, this could be a part of such co-creative research collaborations as well.
Yeah, I want to add that because we also discussed what incentives and disincentives we might have to engage in this co-creation process and transdisciplinary research. And I think here the funding schemes comes to the table, because I mean, at least in Europe, a lot of these European funding schemes, you apply for different goals and topics, and they like to change it every year. So you engage in one of these TD projects, you come to the end of the project and you start thinking, okay, let's try to get some more funding to continue the engagement. But then there is no funding scheme that actually allows you, because they want innovation. So they want something else and something groundbreaking. It doesn't sound, I don't know why, but it doesn't sound very compelling to say, no, I will do. I mean, it sounds, but it seems that you need to do something like, even like new, reinvent a bit the wheel of what you were doing. So what I'm trying to say is that there is from an institutional point of view, I mean, what supports the science and the funding schemes are actually not very suitable yet to support this kind of co-production process. There is very few funding schemes that actually allow us to do that. If you go for Horizon, I mean, you will be asked to do different things and so on. So sometimes then you are bounded by what the funder is asking you and not what your stakeholders want to continue doing. No, so I think this is a very big issue. The short time frame of the projects, plus the limited options to get funding to continue. No, I mean, sometimes you're lucky, but most of the times, it's really tough, the landscape to continue working.
So basically what I understand is that we need systemic change so that so then, okay, now I was going to try and make a joke, but as my colleagues know, I'm often not very funny, so I'll stop it there. So it is now getting close to the end of this forum. So I just wanted to say a few closing words on how it went. So I just wanted to really say thank you for everybody for coming and the interesting talks from our three speakers, and also the fact that you all participated in our discussion part. And so if ever you have any questions that didn't get answered or any comments that you would like to make, of course, please feel free to share your questions with either the speakers directly or with us. And we will publish the recording of this forum on our website and YouTube channel. So we'll keep you notified when that happens. And we'll also send you a reading list related to today's forum. There'll be articles, podcasts, and videos from the speakers, but also other people, so don't hesitate to go looking through that. And lastly, you will also find all our social media in the chat. So, for example, on LinkedIn, our page is called the Pathways Initiative. So if you're interested and want more information about what we do, please come and join us. And the last announcement I would like to make is that we have the next forum organised, and it's on the Thursday, 13th of February from 3 to 5 p.m. CET, and it's about how behavioural insights and solutions can be used to address sustainability issues. So that is me closing this forum, and thank you very much for coming.